ridings that they saw fit and simply started capital projects on the public sector, on the public side, pumping $60 billion into the economy. Now, the population of Canada is roughly about a tenth of that of the States. So basically, we did exactly the same as what the United States did. The other thing, too, is that what happens is you see a transfer. As the government, as John Duncan, who is the conservative member of parliament and also the cabinet minister, shortly after he was reelected in 2008, there was a statement in the newspaper where he stated that when the people are afraid to borrow, then the government will, or something to that effect. And that's exactly what he understands what needs to happen. As we're talking about here, we're talking about a circus where if the never-ending stream of loans were to dry up, the entire economy would tank in probably about a month or something like that. So the government recognizes that when the people are scared and they start to pay off their debts instead of spending more money, well, the government has to step in and spend for us. But the problem for Canadians is that Canadians now hold on average about $100,000 personal debt. And now the government has just marched right up and spent all the money they possibly can to prop the economy up until it is now. So now we got the worst of both situations. Now we've got a situation where Canadians are being hammered on the personal side, and now the government has hammered them on their behalf on the government side. And now we sit at a precipice where the United States has just been handed going to be handled a AA rating. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's ever happened before. And it doesn't matter if it has or hasn't, because if it does, it's going to cause further ripples through the world economy, and Canada's not going to be exempt. So
let's elaborate on that too, but go on.
Sure.
Let's just elaborate on that.
Sure. There's not. I got one more point to make as well for the Canadians listening. What I'm saying is there aren't many places else to hide. Another thing that happened recently in British Columbia was in my mind, unconstitutionally. And we went the group organizers that fought against this HST that's been implemented. HST is called Harmonized Sales Tax, which is a hybrid of the goods and service tax that was illegally imposed upon the Canadian people under the Mulroney reign. And
one second, harmonized to what is my United States perspective of this term? Harmonized to what? Harmonized to the facts that exist?
No, harmonized
to a soluble, and a true solution. Harmonized. Oh my God.
That's what they call it. Yeah,
purposely deceptive terminology.
I think it's kind of interesting because I showed the kids. It's a harmonization of the GST and the PST. But if you take a P and you superimpose it over a G, you basically get a B. So I called it the BST.
Yeah,
that's
a truth, and this is one thing that this mandate for absolute consensual representation outlaws is misleading nomenclature in law. You can't have any of it. To call an act, for instance, no child left behind, the first thing an intelligent person does today, who's got experience with a lifetime of deception, purpose deception, is realize that no child left behind probably means the opposite. Every child left behind. And what is in fact happening to our education system, or the possibility of succeeding or prospering on an education? Of course, it's in not just decline, but such exhaustive decline that there is practically no opportunity left for our young to succeed, even no matter how well they equip themselves to, particularly under the falsified sums of federal indebtedness that we are handing over to them in a criminal manner by our own negligence for the fact that, this is our debt. It's incumbent upon us to pay it, if it is right to pay it at all. It was incumbent upon us to resolve what is monetary solution a long time ago. In fact, then.
That's right. And up here, the catchphrase for the provincial government the premier had to resign over this HST fiasco. And the new premier stood up and she said, well, I'm going to make families the focus. And she coined this phrase, family first, which is just like your no child left behind. If you listen carefully to what these politicians tell you, they're actually telling you what they're doing and how they're screwing you. So if you think about the family first, and my first thought, immediately I thought, families first, no kidding. Now you've given us the HST and transferred all that corporate responsibility on the tax side over to my family. Now it's looking like I'm, as a father of seven, going to have to earn another $5,000 per year just to do what I did the year before when the HST wasn't in place. So yeah, sure, it is family first.
I'm shaking my head because of the audacity to try and deceive the people to that extent. And I mean, how can every candidate for representation not be crying out against this? And how can they? How is it that every candidate isn't crying out for the only thing that's going to solve these problems, which is mathematically perfected economy? And I might explain to the listeners really quickly. We can elaborate on this later if we want, but this transformation to mathematically perfected economy, which I developed long ago, prescribed it to the Reagan administration or campaign actually in 1979, actually can convert a central banking system into mathematically perfected economy in less than a day, and at virtually no cost. And all that's required basically is to refinance all debt under mathematically perfected economy, counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal. All these people who are in foreclosure would instead possibly be, on average, years ahead on their payments. After all, we're reducing, in regard to a $100,000 home or even federal debt, we're reducing our payments in general to approximately 1/12 as much. So that means we're 12 times ahead of the time now, whatever that is. Say we've been paying off our against our house for 3 years. Well, we're 12 times ahead on that. We would be 36 years into paying it. We'd be credited for that much. So we would actually have 33 years. We would be 33 years ahead of where we are now in insofar as paying for our homes and so on, all of our debt, against all of our debts.
So Mike, for the
perfected economy, yes.
For the listeners, would it be accurate then for them to think that if you're 1/12 into paying your mortgage, that under the implementation of mathematically perfect economy, they would in fact own their homes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's a mathematic fact.
Okay.
In other words, if you've paid $100,000 toward your $100,000 home, which under this system you're going to pay $400,000 against, and in fact, as we understand from this obfuscation of the currency, likewise, instead of having paid off a $400,000 obligation, we are furthermore at the end of that period going to actually have assumed a multiplied sum of indebtedness of $400,000. You see, so at the end of paying off the home, we've actually assumed another $400,000 of debt under this system, falsified debt under this system, artificial, falsified, multiplied debt. Merely if we maintain a vital circulation, and if you chart all of this out through time, as I have for 40 years, this becomes blatantly clear. In fact, many of your constituents probably, ought to know that in 1983, I approached the Reagan campaign in 79 when he declared that he was going to decrease federal taxes 10% per year for 3 years, and this was purportedly going to balance the federal budget and eliminate price inflation. And I called them immediately and offered to provide mathematic proofs that it was impossible to accomplish those objects by those means, and that in fact if Reagan didn't adopt mathematically perfected economy, should he succeed to a second term under the double-digit prime rates that the Federal Reserve was charging under Paul Volcker, that it was very likely that the monetary system would collapse in a second term, but that he would not only fail to balance the federal budget, he would accumulate more debt than any president had before him.
Which he did.
Yeah, well, yes, he tripled in his first 7 years in office. In other words, before he even completed his second term, he tripled the entire national debt that had been accumulated in over 200 years before him. He tripled it all. And if those of us who are approximately my age will remember, he really became the dominant candidate of the Republican and Democrat nominees when in a debate with Carter. He turned to Carter famously and gave him an evil stare down, and he pronounced the $150 billion of federal debt that Carter had accumulated over 4 years, $150 billion in 4 years. He pronounced that as unforgivable. He looked him dead in the eye, and he spoke to him with contempt, and he pronounced it as unforgivable. And Carter looked at him feebly and didn't know what to say, because of course he was guilty of increasing the debt more than anyone had before him. But Reagan, of course, multiplied this many-fold over. He tripled the entire national debt of the entire previous history of the country. Tripled it. That is, tripled what Carter had accumulated and everyone before him as well.
That's right.
In 7 years.
And Mike, this smarts at the same thing that we talked about before, of the obfuscation of the currency and also the obfuscation of the process.
That's the whole cause of it, yes.
Because there's Reagan standing there saying, you've blown it, Carter, 150 billion. Then he goes and does the same thing himself.
Yeah. The hypocrisy is. I mean, we should have the contempt for Reagan. Multiplied, divide 150 billion into 3 trillion. And that's how much more contempt we should have for Reagan than Carter.
Yeah, and it's also the fact that I think what I meant to say was it's not debt, it's the interest. And there's Reagan focusing on the debt, and it's something that some people, everybody mostly, needs to start thinking about. Debt is not the problem. When we think about a massive debt, that's just representative of all the circulation that's in place, that's needed to keep the economy going. And under mathematically perfect economy, if we were to publish figures of the amount of debt, then that's actually sort of a representation of the level of
prosperity.
Yeah, debt is not a 4-letter word. It's one of the ones that isn't. But
it's this mistaken idea that debt is our problem. These people came out with this money is debt, YouTube video and all, and these people are just plagiarists of my work.
And Paul Grignon actually lives on the island here. I've spoken to him.
Well, the problem that that they're introducing is a terrible misconception. If we don't understand the fundamental faults, we can't understand what the solution is, and so. This forces me, all these things, and in fact, I was responding for 4, 5, 6 hours just yesterday in regard to further people who are advocating, or they're pretending to advocate the mathematically perfected economy, but they're decrying that money as a debt is the problem. You can't pretend to be an authority, because this is blatantly obvious, the flaws of this, and people will understand this from this simple explanation. Debt is not the issue. Why? A debt equal to the principal, which is what the actual natural debt is. It's only multiplied further by this obfuscation of the currency, which has been imposed upon us without our assent. A debt equal to the principal is no offense against us whatsoever. If I'm a groom of a newlywed couple, for instance, and I bought this $100,000 home that you've built, and my earnings are, easily able to afford, say I only make $1,000 a month. I work in a fast food, outlet part-time, and yet I can easily afford $83.33 a month for a brand new $100,000 home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fact that I've committed to pay $100,000 out of my future earnings, which is only 1/12 of my earnings even, is no offense against me whatsoever. In the end, I'm going to trade equal production, equal volume of my production for your production. You see, there's no offense against this forever, ever. If I paid for it immediately, if I had to pay for it immediately, I would have to maybe save for many years until I could afford to give you the whole $100,000, which would deny not only me